My dear people of Southern Cameroons, I bring you revolutionary greetings this day, which is the 19th day of March in the year of our Lord 2019. Yes, I'm smiling. And I'm not smiling today because we are declaring victory. Sometimes you don't smile because you are really happy, but you simply smile because you have to demonstrate that you are strong and that it is important for us to remain very strong and keep moving on until we get to the final victory. And in this case, until we declare victory in Biya and saying, free, free, free at last. We are free. Today, our discussion is going to be mainly about the just ended visit of the U.S. Undersecretary for African Affairs to Cameroon, Tibor Nagy. After that visit, I've read a lot of comments, both in newspapers and on the social media. And I've read some people feeling so dejected, disturbed, some disappointed on basis of the comments that they heard the U.S. Undersecretary of State for African Affairs make before going to Cameroon. And in the minds of some people, they actually expected to see confrontations. But I guess you understand that, no one ever goes to somebody's house, with punches ready to dig them into his face. But announcing colors of how you think, of how you feel before going there translates exactly what the discussion is really going to be all about. And of course, CRTV, that's the Cameroon Radio Television, which the general manager of the structure himself, Charles Pitagom Dongo, says is the drum of Mr. Paul Biya, of course, stay true to itself. I mean, in the area of manipulation. And that is why all they hung around was the statement that the U.S. Undersecretary for African Affairs made about Mr. Paul Biya, where he said, I greatly appreciate the president's knowledge and the wisdom. Of course, that is a diplomat talking. You don't expect him to tell you that your president is stupid. You don't expect him to tell you that your president is wicked. You don't expect him to standing inside Mr. Biya tell you that your president is a demon. No. And of course, you should expect CRTV to pick that up. I don't know if a lot of you, like myself, did observe that the U.S. Undersecretary for African Affairs arrived in Yaounde on Sunday, the 17th of March 2019. And he actually started meeting some people same evening. But curiously enough, the Cameroon Tribune, that is the government paid, sponsored, and government-owned and run newspaper, Cameroon Tribune, for its edition of Monday, had not a single letter mentioning the U.S. Undersecretary for African Affairs presence in Yaounde. What signs do you need to be told that Yaounde is totally frustrated and that Yaounde knows that they are out of tune with the international community? There is no other way, because in his usual style, Cameroon Tribune should have had him on the big cover and announcing a lot of triumphs. The same thing happened with CRTV. His presence was not on the headlines on CRTV newscasts, both on radio and television. They only resurrected after the U.S. Undersecretary for African Affairs at least gave them a little line on which they could hang when he said, I greatly appreciate the president's knowledge and wisdom. And they quickly took that and ran away with it to the forums to say, you see, Mr. Paul Biya is a great man, he's a brave man. And the next other thing they could sell was Mr. Paul Biya handing him a statuette. Of course, that is what we have become used to with every other dignitary that goes to Cameroon. And the fact that he received the statuette and smiled gave the people of La République du Cameroon, or gave the fanatics an opportunity to say, now you can see it's ended. Every other person that received that statuette has sided with Mr. Paul Biya. And I laughed because I recall that the president of the Confederation of African Football was in Yaounde, was at that same Unity Palace, and that he received a statuette too from the hands of Mr. Paul Biya. And when he came out and speaking to CRTV, he gave them lines they also took and ran away with. What did he say? He said Cameroon is the host of the African Cup of Nations and CAF has no plan B. He made clear that CAF had no plan B. That was even very strong, stronger than what we have heard from the lips of the U.S. Undersecretary for African Affairs. But in the end, what happened? CAF withdrew the organization of the Africa Cup of Nations from Cameroon without blinking. So people should undeceive themselves. And I'd like to take you through just a few statements made by the U.S. Undersecretary for African Affairs. He started his interview with this line, and it is very important. Like I have said here over and over, I am a trained diplomat. I was trained at the International Relations Institute of Cameroon, IRIC. I was in the batch of the first professionals, people trained not just as diplomats, but trained with specific specializations. And so I can tell you without blinking that this first statement that the U.S. Undersecretary for African Affairs made to the journalists before going ahead to answer, to say whatsoever he was saying to every other question, tells you clear that he was simply going to be making embellishments. He was simply going now to be diplomatic. He was simply going to be talking to you about generalities, about everything and nothing. He couldn't say anything beyond it because he said, this is what he said first. He said, diplomatic conversations are always confidential. That closed the interview effectively. So any other thing that comes after that should just be, well, since you want us to talk, let's talk. If Mr. Paul Biya, under the U.S. Undersecretary for African Affairs, came to any clear-cut agreements and conclusions, he would have felt free to go ahead to say this, to go ahead to at least give you some indications. But the fact that he already tells you that diplomatic conversations are always confidential is an indication no agreements were reached. We were very, very divergent on too many things. Our views were simply so contrasted. And so, since we didn't come to any agreements, we also agreed that every person keeps their position. And that's why he didn't have anything to tell you. You want to know more, perhaps ask Mr. Paul Biya. And then he moves on there and says, you can rest assured that our discussions were frank, honest, and direct. We each expressed our points of view. It reaffirms what I just said a while ago. We each affirmed our points of view. But did he tell you that we agreed to anything clear-cut? No. We each expressed our points of view. Take that very importantly. And then he moves on and says, me, like your government, we want what is absolutely the best for the people of Cameroon. Now, when he says this, you have the feeling you can easily again go away like CRTV will want to carry it and run away with the impression that he is saying that at least all of us are now on the same page and think that all of us are, thinking the same direction of peace. No, 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 no. He quickly moves on to the next and most important statement of that interview, which now announces to anyone with a critical mind the clear colors of the aftermath of that meeting. He says, you have a very young population. In the future, they will need jobs. I would like to bring many more investors to Cameroon. We all want the young people of Cameroon to have the best jobs possible. I think American investors will bring very many positive qualities. Our government, President Donald Trump, is also very interested in having much more investments and trade with Africa. For me, that is a personal campaign too. Conditions, of course. American investors require certain conditions. We would like to encourage the country to go in that direction. Wow. You get that? He closes it up. Conditions, of course. American investors require certain conditions. We would like to encourage the country to go in that direction. What does that mean? He is telling you plainly, clearly, and neatly that in the current dispensation, that country does not meet the conditions that can bring in American investors. He is telling each and every one of us that in the current dispensation, that country does not have what it takes for the youth to have the best jobs possible that they require. He is saying in the current dispensation, there is no way any sane person can do business with Cameroon. He is telling you this country as it is headed in the wrong direction. That is why we would like to encourage the country to go in that direction, in the direction of meeting the conditions that make life better, the conditions that ensure the respect of the rights of the people, the conditions that provide for the upholding of the dignity of the human person, the conditions that bring about peace, real peace, not negative peace, the conditions that require that you respect established rules, especially international norms. The U.S. Undersecretary for African Affairs couldn't have been much clearer. And so, you discover that prior to his visit, the people of La République du Cameroun, I say the people, I mean the governing class, those who are milking that country dry, those who are sponsoring the war in Amazonia, those who are doing everything to gas out the lives from all our young people, they were out on a serious cry that statements made by the U.S. Undersecretary for African Affairs were a tacit and total violation of the sovereignty of their country, was unwanted interference in the internal affairs of La République du Cameroun. Now, let me make this clear. What Mr. Paul Biya and his people claim to be an interference in the sovereignty or in internal affairs, especially in the sovereignty of his country, is what? Because Mr. Paul Biya thinks that the people are opening eyes on his atrocities, he says they are violating his sovereignty. And what is that sovereign right that Mr. Biya thinks they are violating? The government and its people and its ardent supporters believe that the international community is violating its right to send their soldiers to rape our wives and children in Southern Cameroons. That the international community is violating their right to send their soldiers to burn down our villages and burn people alive in their various homes. La République du Cameroun believes that the international community is violating its right to send its soldiers to rape our daughters as young as 6 and our grandmothers as old as 85, because they have to do that with impunity. La République believes that the international community is violating its sovereign right to send its soldiers to extort from our people as much as they can, to send its soldiers to transform into civilian attire and harass our people in the name of so-called amber boys and loot from them with impunity, so that they would at least say, yes, the world is respecting them by allowing them to commit all these atrocities without asking questions. Oh yes, La République du Cameroun believes that the world is violating its sovereign right to reduce the people of Southern Cameroons to below subhumans. Its sovereign right to wipe out our own cultural identity. That the international community is interfering in its sovereign right to loot all the natural resources of the people of Southern Cameroons. Oh yes, that the international community is violating its sovereign right to transform us into their punching bags. That is exactly the sovereign right that Mr. Paul Biya and his government feel the international community is violating. And that is why, after this visit, Chief Barrister Charles Taku of the International Criminal Court has come out again to say loud and clear, and he says Cameroon is a state party to the UN, and several multilateral treaties that have been signed by this country warrant it, and he says warrant it to stay by certain standards. So let me take the full statement. He says Cameroon is a state party to the UN and several multilateral treaties. By making a formal declaration of war against the Southern Cameroons, Cameroon automatically triggered the multilateral treaty regime that includes the UN Charter and the Geneva Conventions, among others. The threshold for the intervention of the international community to abate the genocide of the Southern Cameroons by Cameroon soldiers and their military and civilian commanders is now. He says it is urgent. This is not time for diplomacy as usual. Now, this is an important message to take home. What constitutes the internal affairs of La République du Cameroun perhaps has to do with the arrest and detention of Maurice Kamto and all the members of his MRC party. What does not constitute the internal affairs of La République du Cameroun is its incursion in the sovereign country of Southern Cameroons. Southern Cameroons was a UN trust territory on the same scale like La République du Cameroun. The fact that we voted freely in a referendum to join with them upon attaining our independence in a federal system of two states equal in status doesn't give La République du Cameroun the right to treat us as just another province of his country, to treat us as just another subdivision in his country. This is an important clarification for all of us who talk about Southern Cameroons wherever to be able to establish each time we talk. And so I come out of this conversation by taking us a bit now to the upcoming All Southern Cameroons People's Conference. I'd like us to get a bit through the objectives of this conference. And so take note that the conference will bring together all Southern Cameroonians of all shades of opinion around the same table to, one, identify the problems which have plagued our existence since we obtained independence by joining La République du Cameroun in 1961. We will review the social, economic, and political factors that led to the 2016 strikes. We will look at how the government of La République du Cameroun handled the crisis. We will examine its escalation, and we'll look at the onset of the civil war that is ongoing now and the loss of properties and life. We shall also be able to evaluate the efforts that, the so-called efforts. When I say efforts, it's as if, there's some big thing that government has done. But all the same, we'll evaluate the efforts made so far by the government and the people of Southern Cameroons to stem down the crisis and the outcomes. If there are any outcomes, well, we'll be able to examine that. And then we will ascertain the nature and extent of the humanitarian crisis resulting from the burning down of villages, and there are over 300 villages have already been burned down this far, the burning down of hospitals, and how refugees and internally displaced persons can be integrated in the overall drive for peace. Of course, we shall chart the way forward to a sustainable peace, and then we'll look at the role, this is very important, we'll look at the role the international community has to play in achieving this very sustainable peace. And of course, we will seek to reconcile Southern Cameroon's political groups and rally them around this cause for peace, outlining a code of conduct to govern political activities before, during, and after the peace process. Because when we must have secured the independence of the Southern Cameroons, we should be able to have a clear-cut way of doing business that should make us an enviable country, not only in Africa, but across the world. And now, what is the intended outcome of this conference? So many of you have asked. I'd like to dwell a bit on that. When this conference holds, it is intended, or let me say, it is expected to achieve three things. The first will be to heighten international awareness of a conflict which has been treated in the media as simple Anglophone problem. We are not Anglophones, because the definition of Anglophones is very dubious and ambiguous. So it is a burgeoning war that has become genocidal. The international community needs to act fast to avert another Rwanda. We will develop a common strategy for peace within a viable framework for a long-term solution and the role the international community can play within that. And then we will reconcile the different political groups and ideological leanings towards a common or consensus position. This is what we intend to achieve. Now, there are a lot of naysayers out there who have come out, and they keep coming out constantly to bash us for trying to take this noble initiative. And there are those who say, never ever shall we be able to come to a consensus, that the various groups, the various opinions shall never be able to come to a consensus to operate together. And when they say that, they quickly point fingers at past failed experiences. And I want to say that is regrettable. You must note this and take note about this. There is nothing wrong in failing. The problem with failing is when you fail and you refuse to rectify your errors, to see where you went wrong, correct them, and then go ahead to succeed. That is why this Nobel Peace Prize winner, John Steinbeck, says, it is the constant and determined effort that breaks down all resistance and sweeps away all obstacles. It is not in giving up at the first failure or the second failure that you win. It is in being constantly determined that you end up breaking down all resistance and sweeping away all obstacles to your lofty objective. And then this idea is even pushed further by Helen Keller, who says delay is not a denial and defeat is simply a signal to press on. So these difficulties, the delays we have noticed, the failures we have observed simply tell us that yes, we are witnessing a delay, but that this delay is not a denial. And therefore, defeat is simply a signal that we have to press onward. So collectively, let us press onward. If you haven't registered for this conference just yet, I'm pinning once more the link to the Eventbrite site where you will register. You will click on it, it will lead you in to this site and you will register. But if you find difficulties, I'm also going to attach to it a telephone number that you will call, and we will be able, when I say we, I mean members of the organizing committee who are answering these calls 24 hours on 24, will lead you through the registration process, and you will be part of history. Make sure that you will be there. God is with us.